Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. So you guys wanted to hear all about what's going on with the smog in Lahore, Pakistan, right? Well, we've got tons of articles and reports and even some satellite imagery, and it all kind of paints a pretty alarming picture.
Yeah, it's really concerning.
Like we're talking hazardous air quality levels. They had to close the schools there, and they even put a green lockdown in place.
Wow, a green lockdown. That
Yeah, I
sounds
know, right? Like,
serious.
can you even imagine a city so covered in smog that you can actually see it from space?
Yeah,
Well, that's the reality right now in Lahore.
that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's hard to wrap your head around that.
It really is. And we should probably talk about the air quality index too.
Yeah, the AQI, I mean, it's over 500 right now in Lahore. And just to give you an idea, anything over 300 is already considered hazardous,
Oh, wow.
meaning there's a serious risk to public health, even for healthy people.
So this is way beyond just like a bad air day kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is a major public health emergency.
Yeah, and it sounds like people are really feeling the effects too.
Yeah, I mean, just reading these reports, it's
Like it's so
not a
see.
number on a screen, you know?
Yeah,
It's impacting people's lives every single day.
yeah, you can tell that people are really struggling with this. The air is described as being so thick with the smell of burning, like almost like a constant campfire, but way more acrid, you know?
Oh, wow.
And people are talking about the smoky haze that stings their lungs and eyes and leaves this bitter taste in their mouth. It's awful.
It sounds awful.
Constant coughing, the sore throats. It's just taking a toll on everybody.
It's hard to imagine having to live with that every day.
I know, it's really tough.
And I would imagine it's probably even worse for some people than others, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
children, the elderly, anyone with like asthma or other respiratory problems are really bearing the brunt of this.
Hospitals are overwhelmed with patients who are having trouble breathing. There's one report that mentioned a children's hospital that had to set up this whole temporary ward just to deal with all the kids coming in with breathing problems.
Oh, wow. That's
It's really sad.
That's heartbreaking. So we've got this hazardous smog blanketing the city and people are suffering, but what's causing it? Is
Yeah.
this just normal city pollution or is there something else going on here?
Well, it's actually a combination of factors, but the main culprit right now is agricultural burning in the region.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's harvest season, and farmers are burning crop residue to clear the fields for the next planting.
I see.
And it's the scale of these fires that's really alarming.
Yeah, I was reading about that. The satellite imagery from NASA actually showed something like 15,500 to 18,500 fire incidents
Wow.
in the region this year. That's way more than they've seen in past years.
Yeah, that's a huge amount of smoke being pumped into the air.
It's unbelievable. And then, of course, you've got Lahore itself, which is a city with over 13 million people,
Right.
millions of cars, 5 million motorcycles, tons of industries, all adding to the mix.
Exactly. It's like adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah, it really is. So we've got the agricultural fires, vehicles industry. It's like a perfect storm of pollution sources.
It really is.
But there's also a geographical element at play here too, right?
Yeah, you're right. The city's location actually makes things worse. Cold air coming down from the Tibetan mountains traps the pollution over Lahore.
So it's kind of like the city is stuck under this giant lid of smog.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So with everything going on, what are people doing about it?
Well, the authorities have implemented what they're calling a green lockdown.
A green lockdown.
Yeah, it's basically a set of emergency measures to try and curb activity and emissions. They've closed schools, they're asking people to work from home, there are restrictions on vehicles, markets are closing early, and they even closed parks.
Wow, closing down an entire city like that sounds pretty drastic.
It is. It really shows you how serious this situation is.
Yeah, for sure. What exactly does green lockdown mean, though? It sounds like a pretty broad term.
Yeah, it is. It basically means restricting any activities that contribute to air pollution. So on top of what I already mentioned, they're also cracking down on industrial emissions, and they've even stopped construction projects for now.
The goal is to minimize any additional pollution going into the air.
Exactly.
It sounds like they're really trying everything they can, but are these measures actually effective? Like, are they making a difference?
Well, the green lockdown is meant to provide some immediate relief, but it's not really addressing the root causes of the problem.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy. It might stop the bleeding, but it won't fix the bone.
So what are the long-term solutions? How do they actually fix the bone in this situation?
Yeah, that's where things get a bit more complicated. Transforming public transport, tackling vehicle emissions, finding alternatives to agricultural burning, those are the real lasting solutions.
I see.
But those things take time, investment, and a lot of collaboration.
And speaking of collaboration, there's this interesting political dynamic going on here, too.
Oh, yeah.
Pakistani officials are saying that 30% of Lahore smog is actually coming from India.
Right.
And meanwhile, the Indian government has doubled fines for crop burning to try and address their contribution to the problem.
It's a classic blame game
Mm.
situation.
Right.
But at the same time, there's this growing recognition that this is a regional issue that needs a coordinated response.
So there's some finger pointing happening, but there's also this sense that they need to work together.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, we've been focusing on this immediate crisis, but this isn't the first time Lahore's had bad smog, right?
No, you're absolutely right. This isn't just a one-time thing.
So this isn't like a, oh, it's smog season again type of thing.
No, not at all.
This is a chronic, deeply ingrained problem.
Yeah, and Nikhil Omar, who founded the Pakistan Air Quality Initiative, actually makes a really important point.
Okay.
He says this isn't just a seasonal issue. He points out that Lahore's air quality is consistently worse than Delhi's, which is a city that's notorious for its pollution. And it's a year-round concern for Lahore.
So this is something they're dealing with constantly.
Exactly. And it really makes you think, if you were living in Lahore right now, dealing with this hazardous air day in and day out,
Yeah.
what would you want done to address this?
What solutions would you be demanding?
Right.
That's a really thought-provoking question, and one we'll definitely come back to. It makes you think about the human cost of all of this.
It really does.
We've been talking about the science and the politics, but at the end of the day, this is about people's lives, their health, their future.
Absolutely.
And that's something we can't afford to lose sight of. We'll be back in a moment to dive deeper into those potential solutions and what they could mean for Lahore and beyond.
Sounds good. It really is heartbreaking when you think about all those families struggling just to breathe.
Yeah.
But, this situation in Lahore really highlights a much bigger issue.
What's that?
Global air pollution.
Right.
I mean, it's a problem that affects billions of people around the world.
Yeah, for sure.
And it often hits the most vulnerable communities the hardest.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this.
Yeah.
Like, what can any one person really do about a global crisis?
That's a really good point. But it's important to remember that change often starts small.
Okay.
It starts with awareness, with conversations like the one we're having right now.
I like that.
It starts with the choices that we make every single day.
So, like, what kind of choices are you talking about?
Well, think about things like opting for public transport,
Okay.
choosing to walk or bike instead of driving, supporting businesses that are committed to sustainability.
Right.
These things might seem small, but they really do add up.
So you're saying that even though this situation in Lahore seems really far away,
Yeah,
there are things we can learn and apply to our own communities.
absolutely.
Oh,
For example, take agricultural burning.
okay.
It's a major contributor to air pollution in many parts of the world,
If that's true.
and it's often driven by economic necessity.
Mm.
Farmers need to clear their fields quickly and cheaply, and burning is often the fastest and easiest way to do that.
But as we're seeing in Lahore, that short-term solution has some pretty serious long-term consequences for air quality and public health.
Right. So the question is, how do we encourage and incentivize sustainable alternatives?
How do we help farmers adopt practices that are better for the environment and their communities?
Exactly. And that's where individual choices come in.
Okay, I see what you mean.
If we as consumers prioritize products from farms that use sustainable practices,
Right.
that sends a really powerful message to the market.
It's like voting with your wallet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every choice we make, from the food we buy to the way we get around.
Has a ripple effect.
Right. And when those ripples are multiplied across millions of people.
They can create real change.
Exactly.
So individual actions are important, but we also need systemic change, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What role do governments play in tackling a problem as big as this?
Governments have a huge role to play. They set regulations, they enforce emission standards,
Right.
they invest in public transportation,
Right.
they promote sustainable development, they have the power to create policies and infrastructure that support clean air initiatives.
And we're seeing some of that happening in Lahore, right?
Yeah.
With those green lockdown measures.
Yeah.
As disruptive as they are, they show that the government is taking this air quality crisis seriously.
Exactly. And there's also been some talk of environmental diplomacy between Pakistan and India.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is a good sign. It means they're starting to recognize that air pollution doesn't respect borders,
Of course.
and that regional cooperation is going to be crucial for finding long-term solutions.
It sounds promising.
Yeah, but, as we talked about earlier, these measures often feel like temporary fixes.
Right.
What we really need is a fundamental shift in our mindset.
Okay.
We need to start thinking about clean air not as a luxury, but as a basic human right.
I completely agree with you on that one.
That right to clean air needs to be reflected in policy, in infrastructure, in the way we design our cities.
In the way we live our
Oh,
lives.
exactly.
So this is about way more than just wearing a mask and hoping for the best.
Oh, yeah, way more.
It's about understanding that we're all connected.
Right.
The air we breathe is shared, and we have a responsibility to protect it.
I read this really powerful quote from a Lahore resident named Sadia Kashif.
Oh, yeah. What did she say?
She talked about wanting her children to be able to run and play outside without having to worry about the air they're breathing.
It's a simple wish.
It is, but it's so powerful.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of what's at stake here. It's not about numbers on an air quality index.
Right.
It's about people's lives, their health, their well-being, their future.
Exactly. It's about making sure that future generations inherit a planet where they can breathe freely and thrive.
Thinking about clean air as a fundamental right really changes the conversation.
How so?
It shifts the focus from, is this a problem?
To how do we solve it? It challenges us to think about the role we each play in creating a world where clean air isn't a privilege, but a reality for everyone.
And that, I think, is the most important takeaway from our deep dive into the smog crisis in Lahore.
It's a reminder that environmental issues aren't someone else's problem.
Right.
They're everyone's problem.
Yeah.
And even when we're facing a challenge that seems impossible to overcome.
There's always hope if we choose to act.
That's a good point. That sense of hope is crucial.
It's what drives us to find solutions.
And to work towards a better future.
Exactly.
So we've talked a lot about the problems.
Yeah.
But what about solutions?
Right.
What are some concrete steps that can be taken to address this crisis, both in Lahore and around the world?
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've talked about how bad this smog crisis is in Lahore, all the things causing it, and how we need individual and bigger systemic changes.
Right. Well, one of the biggest things is transportation.
Transportation.
Yeah. I mean, Lahore, with its 5 million motorcycles and millions of cars, is a perfect example of how vehicle emissions can really overwhelm a city.
So what can they do about that?
Well, investing in public transportation is key, making it easy and affordable for people to get around without relying on their own cars.
Makes sense.
And promoting electric vehicles, too.
Okay. Yeah.
And designing cities that are more pedestrian friendly,
Mm-hmm.
with bike lanes and sidewalks and all that.
Right, making it easier to walk or cycle places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It all helps to reduce our reliance on cars.
So it's not just about the vehicles themselves, it's
Yeah.
about the way we design our cities, too.
Exactly. It's about creating a whole environment that encourages people to make sustainable choices.
Okay, and what about industrial pollution?
Yeah, that's another big one.
What can we do about that?
Well, we need stricter emission standards for factories.
Okay.
Transitioning away from coal-fired power plants, promoting cleaner production methods. Those are all essential.
I was reading about how they're actually shutting down a lot of those brick kilns in Lahore
Oh, yeah, that's great.
because those are huge contributors to the smog.
They are, and they're often using outdated technology that's incredibly polluting.
And we can't forget about agriculture either.
Right, agriculture is another big piece of the puzzle.
It all comes back to those crop fires.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, finding alternatives to burning,
Right.
promoting sustainable farming practices, helping farmers transition to more eco-friendly methods. It's all connected.
It sounds like there's a lot we need to do.
There is. It's a complex problem that needs a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
And it's not just on governments and policymakers to fix this either.
Okay, so what can the average person do? Like I said earlier, it's easy to feel helpless when you're thinking about a problem this big.
I know what you mean. But even small changes in our daily lives can make a difference.
Like what?
Well, think about your own consumption habits.
Yeah.
Can you reduce your use of single-use plastics? Can you choose products from companies that are trying to be more sustainable? Can you walk or bike instead of driving when you can?
So it's about being more mindful of our choices.
Exactly. And it's about using our voices, too. Support organizations that are working to improve air quality.
Right.
Contact your elected officials. Advocate for stronger environmental policies.
Raise awareness in your community.
Exactly. Those things all matter. If you're concerned about the air quality in your own city, there's this great website called the Clean Air Task Force.
Oh.
They have tons of resources and information about how to get involved.
So it's about taking action both individually and collectively.
Exactly. We're all breathing the same air, sharing the same planet.
Uh-huh.
We're all in this together.
That's a good point. This whole situation in Lahore really drives that message home.
It does. It reminds us that environmental issues aren't just happening over there somewhere.
They're happening everywhere.
Exactly.
Right.
And they affect all of us.
Hmm.
And it's not about placing blame.
Right.
It's about coming together to find solutions so we can all breathe a little easier.
Well said. That's a powerful message to end on. The smog crisis in Lahore is definitely a wake-up call.
It is.
But it also reminds us that we have the power to make things better,
Absolutely.
both through the choices we make every day and by working together to create a healthier, more sustainable future.
I like that. It all starts with asking ourselves a simple question. What kind of world do we want to live in? And what are we willing to do to make that happen?
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the smog crisis in Lahore. We hope you found this conversation informative and inspiring,
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
and maybe even a little bit motivating. Remember, even small changes can make a difference. And when we all work together, we can create a world where everyone can breathe clean air. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.